Hello, it is another Tuesday, which means it's time for another in real life video. And this week we are taking a question from a gentle viewer, and their username should be somewhere in the lower third of the screen right about now. Gosh, I'm still getting used to this new perspective. I've even had to relearn to not do the opening wave with my left hand normally. I have to go to the right hand now. But nonetheless, they ask relatively simply, could you rank, how do you rank the Elder Scrolls races, right? And of course there are quite a few in addition to the playable ones, but I will presume that folks want to know of the playable races and all of that, right? So we'll do exactly that. Let's see here. I've actually got this prepared ahead of time. We're about to shift here into a different mode. There we go. Into one of these numbers, right? We've seen, we've seen these. And I've adequately, I think, according to my preview window, I've hopefully and adequately cropped and covered any form of advertisement on the site, right? Aside from ones that YouTube will present here, right? So we're not getting like double dosage or whatever, so long as I do not scroll, right? I just need to remember to do that. Anyway, I thought this would be a really silly, fun one to do some rankings and stuff, right? I don't know. I love dumb stuff like this, right? I actually really enjoy this. Folks will say that like, yeah, it's kind of like empty calories or whatever, right? It's the equivalent of empty calories when it comes to videos and whatnot. And you know what? That's true. But man, I love an ice cream cone, right? I like to eat an ice cream cone. I like to eat a cookie, right? Little bit now and again doesn't kill you, right? Or I enjoy it. I enjoy it. But nonetheless, hey, as per usual, feel free to submit. Gentle viewers, submit questions yourself in the comments. Helps a ton if you include a question mark. And just as well, if this inspires you, feel free to ask me to rank more stupid stuff, because, like I said, I really enjoy it. I do kind of like it. Anyway, here we go. The 10 playable races present in most every Elder Scrolls game, right? And I think the art that they're using here is a combination of art from Elder Scrolls Online and Elder Scrolls Legends, the now defunct online CCG, right? Collectible card game. Anyway, let us start with the easiest one for me. Dunmer, right? I always play Dunmer, at least for my first run through. Certainly is the case for all the playthroughs, right? Every first playthrough is bar minimum Dunmer. And that means they get S rank. So why S? Right? Why are they my favorite? A lot of that, if you're like a longtime viewer of the channel and all of that, you will know probably the answer to this. A lot of that is owed to nostalgia combined with just having an overwhelming amount of writing compared to a lot of the other playable races, right? Thanks to a lot of the groundwork laid by the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, they just so happen to have like maybe the most complex culture and subcultures and like subversions and derivatives of it that I find it super fascinating, right? Like, you take into account all of the various great houses, they each have their own ideology. You take into account even the sixth house, right? You take into account Ashlanders. Their relations with other races are pretty decently thoroughly explored. And they just kind of have like a dour, miserable attitude, which I enjoy a lot. I enjoy playing. I oftentimes enjoy playing kind of a miserable bastard in some way or another, right? Even among playing like characters that are otherwise heroic, I do like a little tinge of misery in there, a little tinge of like suffering, if you will. And who else better personifies that in Elder Scrolls canon than the Dunmer, right? And like I said, my very first Elder Scrolls game was Morrowind, so there is unquestionably some degree of bias there, right? But hey, this is my list, right? I enjoy the idea that a lot of folks would have lists or rankings very different from mine. But I don't know, maybe I'll be batting closer to average than you would think. All right. So sort of in that same vein, I would say my next favorite, or not even my next favorite, but the next one that we should tackle is the Argonian, right? The Argonian right here. Where should we put it? I am tempted to, right off the bat, I'm tempted to put them at B. Right? I think that they're a perfectly well-conceptualized fantasy race, right? This is sounding a little screwed up, right? They're a perfectly fine race. This sounds messed up, right? In this video game, right? Of course, in video games, a lot of, especially in fantasy, when we refer to races, oftentimes we are referring to separate species, right? That said, Elder Scrolls kind of tends to go for both, right? For instance, the elven races are actually different races of elf, right? But obviously, like a Nord and a Dunmer are of two different species, but a Nord and an Imperial are both races under humanity, right? And in the case of Argonians, very much a different species. But I would say B for Argonian, right? They're not terrible. They're not amazing. They're very interesting, right? They have a lot of interesting things, but I would argue is a lot of their interesting stuff, at least that I know of, right? Lord knows there is a wealth of information in the Elder Scrolls Online that I am unaware of, right? And there is a good chunk of stuff wherein ESO, you get pretty dang into Black Marsh and all of that. Not into its heart, as far as I know. I don't think they've yet done that. But there's a good chunk of that. However, as far as I know, as cool as like something like the Hist is, right? As cool as it is that like they lay eggs, they have the whole like God, what are they called? The shadow scales. That's pretty neat, right? Wherein they're often like looked upon as like, oh, you've been born into being an assassin. And of course, they have the long storied history with Dunmer, right? Wherein they're very frequently subjugated and enslaved by them, right? And they have their immense amount of importance in resolving the Oblivion crisis, right? Ultimately, a lot of that, right? As cool as something as like being having a pivotal role in ending the Oblivion crisis, that's something that happens off screen, right? As players, we don't get to partake in that. We don't get to see that directly, which in that sense, yeah, that's cool. But you know what would bump it up to an A or an S rank? If we got to participate in some way, right? If I got to see it more immediately, more directly, right? A lot of the cool stuff about Argonian life, you read about in books, right? You don't actually get to experience too much of their political stuff. And once again, like I said, huge grain of salt we have to take here. In the case of this being my list, I've not played ESO. I don't know how much they get into that stuff there, right? It seems tantalizing, but like I said, I gotta put them at a B. I don't know. It sounds cool, but I want some more, right? I want to see more. All right. Which, while we're at it, we ought to go to the other beast race here, Khajiit, right? we ought to rank Khajiit here. And where should they be? Immediately, I want to say Khajiit is either an S or an A rank Elder Scrolls race, right? I know a little bit about their like multiculturalism, right? I think a big difference between Khajiit and Argonians is the ways in which they're even more intricately intertwined with their oppressors, right? I know there's plenty about elsewhere in ESO that I'm unfamiliar with. Plenty of stuff with dragons, various types of Khajiit, various things about their culture, moon worship, makes them very fascinating, especially for a place where, celestial bodies on Nirn, or in this, I don't know what you call this realm of existence, I forget off the top of my head, Mundus, celestial bodies like moons are particularly important, right? But I would just say, in knowing the way in which one of the things I love about Khajiit is their relationship with moon sugar, right? Wherein it is this like borderline narcotic that is used for like religious spiritual purposes that got repurposed. I think it's canon, right? I think it's not open to interpretation, but that the existence of skooma, the addictive, far worse version of like refined moon sugar, is a product of Dunmer, specifically Dunmer slavers who are like attempting to use it to further like pacify enslaved populations of Khajiit. Right? I believe that's the case. And that, I think, is extremely screwed up and extremely cool. Right? I think that's some good world building. Right? Wherein their oppressors have like taken and altered something that was otherwise sacred to them and used it against them, to where there's such like negative stereotypes about Khajiit everywhere. Regardless of how true or not they may end up panning out to be, right? Regardless, there's this ever-present caricature of Khajiiti culture wherein, like, you're a skooma fiend, right? I love the characterization there, right? As well, I love that there are so many different, like, what would you call it? What? It's not sexual dimorphism, but there are so many different like types of Khajiit. I don't know what the exact word is, but within like the like taxonomy of Khajiit or whatever, there are so many different kinds. There are like enormous lion-like Khajiit. There are little house cat-like Khajiit, the Alfiq. I absolutely love it. And true enough, Khajiit might be one of the most iconic Elder Scrolls races, right? If I had to say like, oh, what's the most iconic Elder Scrolls race? Maybe Dunmer, but that said, a lot of other fantasy settings have dark elves. None quite like the Dunmer, right? But very few pull off the Khajiit, a like feline playable race to such a degree, right? It's quite the feat, right? And they do have a pretty, you know what? With respect to their culture and all of that, and like the different subspecies involved, that amount of like dimorphism, their relationship with other, well, I suppose one way in which they kind of suffer is that they have this incredible amount of world building between them and elves, right? Between them and like Bosmer, Altmer, and especially Dunmer, Orsimer to a lesser degree, right? But they have very little in the way of a like remarkable bit of world building when it comes to like the races of man, you know? In that case, they aren't perfect. But I still think that they qualify for S rank, right? They're iconic to Elder Scrolls, right? How could we say otherwise, right? They're absolutely defining. Despite being in the vast majority of Elder Scrolls games, they are like a significant minority, but how memorable are they, right? They're fantastic, right? Could you imagine Elder Scrolls without Khajiit? Right? They are fantastic. Everybody loves them, right? If you hate them, I don't know, eat shit. I don't know. All right. So who should we go for next? Maybe another similar situation here. We just mentioned Bosmer. Let's delve into Bosmer here, right? I do like, when it comes to Bosmer, the Wood Elves, I like the ways in which, like, in overarching, like, world building and whatnot, they attempt to subvert the, like, Wood Elf caricature, right? Of being like, oh, we're super at peace with flora and fauna. We're super chill. We love being out in the wilds. By virtue of them like partaking in heavy meat eating, right? They love plant life so much that they tend toward being like incredibly, what would you call it? Carnivorous, right? However, the extent to which that exists in Elder Scrolls is minimal, right? In fact, I would say, I'm pretty sure they're no longer like that, right? Is it Green Pact? Is that what it was? Green Pact stuff with the Bosmer? I don't think that happens anymore, right? I don't think these sorts of carnivorous Bosmer really exist in a great population anymore, right? They're more so like on the fringes of society, right? You know, if they were included in a mainline Elder Scrolls game, I would guess they would be somewhere around the population of like the Forsworn, as you see them in Skyrim, right? These sort of Bosmer who are super carnivorous, right? Who are incredibly zealous about plant life. I would equivocate them to being as marginalized as Forsworn are, Reachmen are in Skyrim, in Nord culture. If you could even say that the two are related, right? If anything, I would say that they're a non-playable race. They would be a different group here. I think you could make a case for that. Otherwise, I do think it's neat that they have, right, this, I forget what it is, but there is an animalistic nature about Bosmer, right, that also, once again, and we must dock points for it, they're no longer like this, right? As far as we know, the vast majority of Bosmer no longer have this, like, inherent animalism wherein some of them, like, transform or whatever, right? Some of them, like, start almost akin to, like, a werewolf or a werebear, right? They have situations like this where they will transform. I don't think they really exist too much anymore, right? Certainly we don't really get to experience it in games. Once again, this is stuff that we read about, right? This is stuff that we kind of hear about on the periphery. Which I think is a long way of saying that, like, taking all of this together, right? Bringing all of these disparate thoughts together is, I would go out of my way to conclude, wow, Bosmer sure aren't as cool as they could have been, right? They aren't as cool as they used to be. They sound way more cooler in these other depictions, right? They are simply not as cool as they could have been. They have, if anything, they have veered further into sort of like the standard fantasy tropes of being like, wood elves, friends of the forest and all of that in a very bog standard way, right? There's that interesting and compelling subversion no longer exists, right? Now, they once again also have a very curious relationship with like the Altmer in particular in Skyrim. They have involvements with, like the Third Aldmeri Dominion, right? But once again, we have to concede a lot of that we don't directly get to witness, right? A lot of that is minimal. So I am tempted to, I'm questioning, are Bosmer in rank C or D? Are they tiered at tier C or D? However, I think what lifts them up to tier C, for me at least, right? Once again, speaking just for myself, what I think elevates them to tier C has got to be just the fact that they have a good slew of iconic Bosmer weirdos, right? Significantly less so in Skyrim, right? Skyrim drastically dialed back the amount of Bosmeri weirdos relative to Oblivion and Morrowind, which is rife with them, right? One of Morrowind's most iconic, like, quote-unquote boss fights is a Bosmer, right? True enough, it's played for comedy, right? But who can deny Gaynor, right? Who could deny that maybe one of the most iconic side characters in Morrowind is a Bosmer, Fargoth, right? Fargoth is absolutely iconic. You've got that one freak in Oblivion during the Fighters Guild arc who is absolutely deranged. Very literally, you have that deranged lunatic, what's his name, Glarthir? Was it Glarthir? In Oblivion, who is like a massive conspiracy theorist in, was it Skingrad? I think it was Skingrad. That was absolutely fantastic. The Manic dude during the Shivering Isles was kind of a riot in his own way, right? I think maybe we could, if only there were more deranged Bosmer characters in Skyrim, I would be down to bump them up to a B. But I think where they rest for me at the time being is in C, right? What we need is Bosmer to go back to the old me, right? Bosmer need to collectively agree it's time to go back. We have to go back. We have to regress. We need to become more fucked up, right? We need to become more little weird dudes going around, right? I think you run the risk of making them become laughable, right? I think you run a risk there, but I don't know. I guess it depends on the rest of the game, but I do kind of like it. I do kind of like the conceit of there being so many Bosmeri weirdos, right? It helps a lot to make up for the fact that, once again, so much of their cool world building, they're no longer like that, right? And when they were like that, we didn't really get to see it in any of the games directly. At least I haven't, you know? The whole situation where they're very carnivorous, they ain't like that no more. And when they were, we never really got to witness it. It's just stuff that we read about, right? We only ever hear about it. And thus, they must be assigned to the C tier. Okay. Nords. We just brought up Nords, we may as well cover them here, right? They definitely have, thanks to Skyrim, they have a lot of information that we've seen about with regards to like their various subcultures and beliefs within there, right? Like I said, I probably wouldn't include Forsworn or Reachman under the purview of Nord. However, Nordic relations with Reachmen and Forsworn are absolutely fantastic and super duper interesting, right? I'm super into that. And there's no denying that now, thanks to Skyrim, which I say that like Skyrim is relatively recent. That is not the case anymore. There's no denying that they just have a ton more writing, right? There's just so much more world building about them. There's so many like memorable characters in Skyrim and even beyond, right? If we look outside of Skyrim, if we try to remove that recency, right, quote unquote, recency bias, if we look back to like Morrowind or Oblivion, you sort of get the like iconic, like braggadocious lout, like you get the sort of Lord, certainly in Morrowind, you get one of Morrowind's most iconic archetypes of guy, right? You get one of Morrowind's most iconic types of guy, wherein there is just a near naked Nord man stranded, burdened or encumbered or whatever on the roadside who you meet and has fallen ill of witches to some degree, right? To some degree. Is he making it up? Is he full of it? Was he just drunk? Who can say? But man, I love it, right? I do kind of love it, and I do kind of enjoy, and I think this is entirely like produced by fans and sort of egged on by fans, but I do like the way in which sort of like the Elder Scrolls fandom has come to portray like, oh, you're the strong like Nord man, the nationalistic Skyrim comes first Nord man, and you have also a penchant for Dunmer or Khajiit lovers on the side or whatever, right? It's the big secret that nobody talks about is that Nords, and not even necessarily the masculine types, but Nords be horny for Dunmer and Khajiit, right? It happens a lot. And you know what? I love it. I love it. I respect it. I love it a lot. I hope that they play into it going forward. I hope it becomes sort of a little like tongue-in-cheek nod here and there that look, oh yeah, check out this guy. Yeah, look who he's with, right? have a fun little bit like that. I enjoy it a lot, right? I enjoy the very idea of like maybe we can in some way overcome, like in some way we can slightly, not fully, but in some way people just being horny is going to do a lot of damage to institutions built around like bigotry and like hatred of other races and stuff, right? People just being kind of horny and in love. I think there's something like silly and beautiful about that, right? And I love it. And like I said, there's plenty of like world building. There's all the shit with like Ysgramor, Talos, right? That's super duper interesting. Yeah, I would say it's between S and A. And I'm not quite convinced that they have quite reached the level of Dunmer and Khajiit, right? Because when I think Elder Scrolls, I don't immediately think like Nord, right? But I could very easily see someone make an argument for Nords being in their S tier. But I think for me, I think they're in A, right? Whereas like Dunmer and Khajiit are, for me, absolutely iconic, right? So we gotta put them there. Okay. How about we cover the other big game that I've played And who knows, there may be a re-release of some sort, a remaster or remake, due out any day. Let's talk about Imperials, who have frankly, if the Bosmer have been subjected to this idea where a lot of what made them cool no longer persists in the actual games, right? They're either not like that, or in the case of Imperials, a lot of that got retconned, right? Stuff about Cyrodiil being like jungle-like, that's okay, but I feel like either way, that's not going to weigh too heavily on my read of them being who they are, right? Their own cultural identity or whatever. More so stuff with like the various like subcultures that exist within Cyrodiil pretty much do not exist within Oblivion, right? I bring this up a whole lot, that Oblivion has such a like generous outlook on Cyrodiil, on the Empire, and all of the diaspora of different peoples living there, that it feels like such a like wasted opportunity to like explore colonialism, right? Like Skyrim and Morrowind both, the predecessor and successor of Oblivion, both thoroughly take a look at imperialism, right? And sort of the effects of it on these cultures, on Nord culture, on Dunmeri culture. And Oblivion just really does not do that, right? It is very much at the periphery, or mostly non-existent, right? A lot of the main quest takes precedent, right? If anything, Oblivion stops to no end to be kind of masturbatory when it comes to the Blades, when it comes to the Empire, right? When it comes to this sort of like incredible draconic bloodline of heroes, right? They're born with this specific blood in them that just makes them better, you know? There's a lot of that going on. I do love how Skyrim sort of reconfigures and recontextualizes once again. It sort of takes us back to how things were with regards to the Empire, with regards to the Blades and the East Empire Company. It brings them back into being kind of contentious, right? I do like that. Lord knows there's that really cool quest arc with the East Empire Company in Skyrim. Morrowind has a lot of the Blood Moon DLC is dedicated to the East Empire Company. You can see their like effects of sort of like their corporate bend toward like imperialism with regards to how things are seen in a lot of the imperial towns, right? Sort of like the ways in which a town like Pelagiad, or even better, Caldera, is like encroaching upon Dunmeri life. The ways in which they're wielded alongside like House Hlaalu, right? That's super cool. But I think there is just something to be said for the fact that Oblivion, the game set in Cyrodiil, just does not have the sauce, right? It just does not have it when it comes to world building for Imperials, right? It really is not operating on the same level, right? As much as I do love Oblivion, it does not have the same like vibe when it comes to world building that is present in Skyrim or Morrowind, right? It feels very much like the odd duck, and it is successful in what it does. It is very fun and enjoyable, right? But it feels very different from the other two, right? And for that reason, for me, it is between B and C for Imperials. And what I would love to see is in Elder Scrolls 6, I would love to have more stuff like sort of the way in which they set up the blades to be contentious with the player. A lot of ways in which like someone like General Tullius exists within Tamriel in Skyrim, right? He is fantastic, especially with what's her name there as well in the Imperial Legion, right? That whole situation involving the politics of the Civil War in Skyrim is fantastic. Man, I love it so much. It's so good. But I don't know if it's enough to make up for the lack of it in Oblivion itself, in Cyrodiil. They take very different priorities with like the world building there, right? Very much the focus is on like sort of like the fight against the Daedric invasion, the Oblivion crisis itself. And it's a time for people to come together and for heroism to triumph, as it were. Right? There's very little about that. Right? When concerning someone like Mankar Cameron, there's very little screen time actually devoted to like exploring Mankar Cameron and like why he would be fed up with the Tamrielic Empire and want to go through with something like bringing Mehrunes Dagon into the world, right? It pales in comparison to information that we have on sort of like stuff around the White Gold Concordat, right? Stuff with the Skyrim Civil War. That stuff is so juicy. But you know what? In light of it being so juicy, of like the Skyrim Civil War being frankly one of my highlights of Skyrim's world building, I find it absolutely delightful in the characterization of General Tullius and of course Ulfric Stormcloak and the ways in which they sort of bounce off of one another and their various like factions, right? I absolutely love it. You know what? I'll bump them up to B. Right? They could be A. They could even be S, right? But I want more about the culture clash, right? I want more about their culture sort of butting heads with every other province, you know? I want more of that. There could be so much more. And I feel like, and I hope, that Elder Scrolls 6 does get into more of that, right? I feel like it's rife with opportunity, and you could also have the additional layer of complexity with an external faction like the Third Aldmeri Dominion or some other group, right? Which brings us to, speaking of the Third Aldmeri Dominion, maybe we ought to talk about Altmer, right? I don't know if I'm going to have an amazing segue to bring us to Breton, Orc, or Redguard here, right? It's kind of amazing that it worked out this way up to this point, but I don't know. So for Altmer, immediately, I'm inclined to say we're looking at C or D, right? There is, once again, there's a lot of stuff in ESO about Alinor, about Sigic monks, the Sigic order, that I just am unaware of, right? Skyrim alludes to the Sigic order in a good way, right? It's kept at the periphery in a very interesting and fascinating way. Lord knows the Third Aldmeri Dominion makes for a very enjoyable villain, right? And I like their points. For as terrible and fascistic as they are, I do love the points that they bring up about Talos worship, right? I think that's fantastic. But I can't help but just see them and immediately have them caricature, like, they're assigned to be like almost cartoonish villains, you know? They're just villainous, right? There is yet to be a very compelling, like goodly subfaction of Altmer, you know? At their best, when they're sort of deployed at their best in other games, they're kind of hoity-toity and ridiculous and like over the top, right? Which is kind of silly and fun in its own way. Yeah, I think if ever there were... I think they just need more going on, right? They just need more going on. Because what's there leans very much into, like, generic fantasy. There's no interesting subversion or whatever. We hardly ever get to explore, like, interesting subcultures and interactions, right? They're very much like a dominant force. What they have to say when it comes to like the White Gold Concordat, they're warring with the Empire, the situation with Nords and Talos, right? That's interesting, but I think a lot of that is less interesting for them, but it goes to show, it goes to sort of illuminate how interesting Imperial and Nords are, right? Their weird relationship with Dunmer, I think, is less about them being cool and more about Dunmer being cool, right? And maybe they're in some way suffering from being overly portrayed as being villainous, right? I think that they're D rank for me, right? We just need more, and I feel like we will get more, but for now, I think it's gotta be D rank, right? I just find them very... like the way in which they're presented, they serve to uplift and make other cultures and all of that seem cooler, because often they are in opposition to them, right? Which of course there are more Altmer than are in, right? Altmer exists beyond the Aldmeri Dominion, the third Aldmeri Dominion, but frequently when they are portrayed in the games, they take on this very much like air of nobility, of like holier than thou, even when they're not in the third Aldmeri Dominion. We see this happen all the time in Morrowind and Oblivion, you know? And for that, I gotta put them down there, right? Maybe ESO would completely like change my mind and bump them way up, but I think that's gotta be it, right? It would help perhaps if their like whole vibe and aesthetic weren't so like generic fantasy, or maybe we got like more information on them, ways in which they're intertwined with like pantheons and stuff like that, right? We get information with like Oriel and like their refusal to acknowledge Talos in some way with regards to the third Aldmeri Dominion. I think there's room for them to be incredible and complicated if you have Altmer who are sort of characterized as being villainous, following the oppressive nature of the third Aldmeri Dominion. I think there's room there for them in that way to be sort of victimized both by the Aldmeri Dominion and by these other cultures who are like reacting based on the Aldmeri Dominion's actions, right? I think there's room for that, but we just haven't seen it yet. You know, we just haven't seen it yet. How about orcs? Right? Another group that has very little in the way of world building, right? Or very little in the way of writing. For as interesting as they are, Skyrim perhaps most of all, well, barring ESO, which apparently has one heck of a little story to tell in the Rothgarian Highlands. Which, you know what? I haven't played it, but in hearing that it's so good, I have to take that into consideration, I think. Just from hearing that it is that good. Minor consideration, but not that much, because like I said, I haven't played it myself. Right? But it is, I must admit that it will color my opinions in some way. I do really like the ways in which orcs are portrayed in Skyrim, right? With regards to like the heavy emphasis on smithing, the relationship with the Daedric princes and all of that, right? That's very fascinating with Trinimac, Mephala, all that. that's super intriguing. Their little, what do you call them? Their strongholds and outposts, I forget what exactly the name is in Skyrim, are fantastic, right? It really does feel like you're entering a different sort of displaced culture's diaspora when you enter an orc stronghold, right? Even to enter them, there are unique things that you have to go through, right? You have to in some way appease them even to gain access. That's super cool, right? I think that's super fun. I do enjoy that a lot. But once again, they suffer from a good chunk of stuff just not really yet being there. And in that, right now, a lot of it is covered off camera, off screen, or it hasn't happened yet, right? It feels like the groundwork is being laid, perhaps. And in that sense, I'm torn between B and C. Right? Do I think that they're as egregious as Bosmer when it comes to sort of like their portrayal in the games? Right? I don't think so. Which leads me to want to put them up at B. Right? Because if I compare like information that we have on orcs, right? It's very fascinating, it's very cool. A lot of it is still in effect. We get to see that culture being practiced. We get interactions with it with regards to their little like outposts and all of that in Skyrim land. Skyrim did wonders for making orcs super duper intriguing, sort of like more officiously confirming them to be Mer in some way, or Samur. It's really fantastic, right? Orcs are, barring ESO, orcs are at their prime, I would say, in Skyrim, right? Breton. I have not yet played Daggerfall. Right, I have not yet played it. I think, I hate to say it, but I think my read of Breton is exceptionally low. I think look, there's a reason why it took this long to get to Breton. And that reason is probably because I find them uninteresting, right? What's cool about them, right? They're in some way inspired by like their culture is very much taking notes from real life francophone culture, very France inspired, right? You get like sort of traditional like castles and whatnot. They talk a lot about, okay, this is my kill shot for Breton, why I want them low on this list. For me, it's between C and D for Breton, right? Having not played Daggerfall. How often have I heard like, oh yeah, the internal politicking present in High Rock, you wouldn't believe the levels of complexity and what is going on, right? The different degrees of etiquette present between these groups. Show me. Bretons, come and show me, right? I have yet to see it. I have yet to experience it. Bretons, when it comes to this, as far as I'm concerned, as far as my ignorant ass is concerned, having played a limited amount of ESO and zero Daggerfall yet, Breton are all show, don't tell, right? They may as well be the most generic of fantasy present in this game. And you know what? I'm ready to roast them. Everybody loves to play Breton. If you want an easy time, if you want it easy on Nern, who you gonna pick but Breton? Magic resist? oh, I guess I just want to take less damage and have more magicka. I want to take less magic damage and have a little bit more magicka. Easy pick. Easy pick. Why don't you go get stuck in tier D, Bretons? Right. To be clear, they're like, right, sort of removing this veneer of sardonic and like flippant commentary. I think there's a lot of room for exploring sort of, you know, the ways in which they're intertwined between like the races of man and mer. I think there's room for that. But sort of being, you know, half-elves don't interest me too much on the basis, right? You gotta come to me with more, right? Being someone who is mixed, I guess, in real life, I don't know, that's old hat to me. That's not that fascinating, right? I live that, right? I know about a lot of stuff like that. I have personal experience, ergo, it just ain't that cool to me. You really gotta come with your top game to make that an interesting tale for me, right? You really gotta be weaving quite a story, you know? The threads of prophecy need to be coming together to something real spicy, real nice, right? Otherwise, like I said, it's old hat, right? Okay. So Redguard, who are liable to, in the very near future, a lot of people seem to think, and so far I don't think we know for certain, right? A lot of people just sort of shooting from the hip thinking that it is going to be set in Hammerfell, right? Which I would totally be down for, but I don't think we know on an official level in any capacity, right? Even leaks. I don't think there is a single credible leak that has mentioned that Hammerfell will be it. Like I said, I think it's all shooting from the hip. Nobody knows for certain. Anybody who is confirmed one way or the other, that's just scuttlebutt, right? I've yet to see anything credible from like a reliable source or leaker or whatever, right? But having said that, there is a lot of super cool shit going on. A lot of super cool and frankly super fucking weird shit going on in Redguard culture. If you have ever picked up an in-game book about Redguard culture, you get some wild and weird stuff going on and popping off in those books, right? It's incredibly fascinating. You have various talks of like the sword singing and all of that, which isn't new to fantasy and all of that, but it is cool to hear and see it in here. I do sort of like the like roughly like Arabic inspired culture that they have. I do really like it when they delve into like seafaring stuff, right? When they have a lot more of a naval bent to Redguard anything, right? You see a lot of it present in Anvil, in Oblivion. You see a good chunk of it present in Skyrim, right? Maybe not so much the naval stuff, but Lord knows one of the more iconic quests early on in Skyrim is the one with Sadia, right? And you get some intrigue on politicking within like Redguard nobility, right? You get a lot of interesting stuff right there. There's a good chunk of setup about them and relations between like the Redguard, what would you call it? The Redguard like governing body and the third Aldmeri Dominion. You get very fascinating things there. They have the Elder Scrolls Redguard spin-off cool game, which is still on my to-do list. I know very little about it, but I've heard that it is quite the trip. And as far as I know, it's all entirely canon, right? So that does color my opinion a little bit on them in being more positive. But that said, I don't know if they're quite yet at the position of S or A rank, I think we're dealing with another B rank, right? And I can so easily see them being elevated to A rank with if the next major game is in Hammerfell, right? I can so easily see that situation. Even S rank, right? Even S rank, I could see it. It really depends, right? But I would probably say, depending on how Elder Scrolls 6 goes, I could very easily see them being elevated to A. But for right now, I think they're smack dab in the middle. Loads of potential, loads of stuff at the periphery, but I want more, right? I want some more, right? I think that's the proper place. Which concludes our list. Is there anything that I regret? I think Breton, I could have probably put it C, right? Breton probably could have been tier C, right? But once again, a lot of that is owed due to the fact that just haven't played Daggerfall yet. Daggerfall Unity, we are approaching that before too long. Well, I guess we'll see about this Oblivion situation, right? That may throw a wrench in plans. But yeah, I think this is it, right? Our two most, would you not agree that the two most iconic Elder Scrolls races are Dunmer and Khajiit? I feel like, for me, that is the case, and this is my list. I think that's why they belong at the top. They got a lot going for them, right? Nord, really fantastic. Skyrim did so much for like world building around them, right? But they're not quite on the same level, right? They're not quite as iconic, right? In B, a lot of this, I think, are groups that are primed, ready for ascension, ready to be taken to the next level with just the right kind of world building and all of that. Another game or something could very easily take them up to A or S, right? I think everybody in rank B there's just a few things holding them back, you know, and they're ready to go. C, if that's what B rank was, C is that still needs some more work, right? If Bosmer were still like that, right, like we touched on, I would say put them back up at B, right? But they aren't. I can't lie that docks major points, that they're not as cool as they once were. A lot of the cool cultural touchstones about Bosmeri culture that I know of, they're just not like that anymore, right? They took away the cool stuff about them, right? And then when it comes to Altmer and Breton, I sit here wondering, well, what is cool about them? Was there ever anything? Right? I sit here from the top of the throne, a miserable Dunmeri bastard, looking down upon them, and I wonder, what have they got to offer? Well, what's really cool about them? Sure, they may have efficient ways of playing the game, right? They may be villains in some way, but is the third Aldmeri Dominion as compelling of a villain as the Tamrielic fucking Empire? I don't think so. I think the Tamrielic Empire makes for way more of a compelling foil to the other provinces, right? I think the third Aldmeri Dominion and their sort of like fascist like boot marching situation only serves to make the other stuff even cooler, right? Sorry, Altmer. Sorry, Breton, for for not having played Daggerfall yet, right? I'm very interested how high will Daggerfall send Breton up, right? Will it? I don't know. I'm not convinced. Maybe Breton will get put in rank C, right? Maybe, but I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. I like this list, though. I like this. This very much feels like my list, right? And I think the only way you get by with putting a few in rank D is to be a little flippant, a little silly about putting them down there, right? I like this. I like this a lot. All right. That ought to do it for this week. How long was... Oh my God, we took forever talking about this. Holy cow. If you just... For only 10 things to rank here, golly, I talked so much about them. Hopefully in the future, when we have more of these... Oh, look, an ad popped up too. Look at that. A fucking ad popped up in the middle of this. Can I even avoid it? Yeah, there we go. Good Lord. I didn't even notice it got stuck up on the capture. But either way, when next we return with another one of these, hopefully people send me more things to rank, because I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it so much. This was very fun. But hopefully it doesn't take as long. Hopefully it's like a 10-15 minute affair. Right? I don't know. I like Elder Scrolls. I like talking about it. I'm very sorry. I very much enjoy it. It's one of my faves. All right. That ought to do it for this week. Until next time, please take care of each other.